Pride and Prejudice is a famous book written by Jane Austen, a great English writer. It was first published in 1813. The story happens in England during the early 1800s, a time when people cared a lot about social class and marriage, especially for women. The title, Pride and Prejudice, talks about two big ideas. Pride, which means thinking too highly of yourself, and prejudice, which means judging someone without really knowing them. The main character is Elizabeth Bennet, a smart and independent young woman. The story follows her life as she deals with love, family, and society's rules. She meets a rich but proud man named Mr. Darcy, and their relationship changes as they learn to understand each other better. The Bennet family and Mr. Bingley's arrival. In a small village in England, there lived a family named the Bennets. They were not rich, but they were happy. There were 7 people in the family: Mr. Bennet, Mrs. Bennet, and their 5 daughters, Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. Mr. Bennet was a quiet man who liked to read books and make jokes. He spent most of his time in his library, away from the noise of the house. Mrs. Bennet, however, was very different. She was loud, busy, and always worried about one thing: finding husbands for her daughters. In those days, it was very important for women to marry well because without a husband, they had no money or security. The oldest daughter, Jane, was beautiful and kind. Everyone loved her. Elizabeth, or Lizzie, was the second daughter. She was smart, funny, and liked to think for herself. Mary was serious and enjoyed reading books and playing the piano. The 2 youngest sisters, Kitty and Lydia, were playful and loved talking about soldiers and going to parties. One day, exciting news came to the village. A wealthy young man named Mr. Charles Bingley had rented a big house nearby called Netherfield Park. Everyone talked about him because he was handsome, friendly, and very rich. When Mrs. Bennet heard about Mr. Bingley, she became very excited. "Oh, Mr. Bennet," she said, "we must visit Netherfield Park at once. One of our daughters could marry Mr. Bingley." At first, Mr. Bennet pretended not to care, but secretly he visited Mr. Bingley without telling his wife. When Mrs. Bennet found out, she was thrilled. She started planning how to introduce her daughters to Mr. Bingley. Soon there was a big party in the village. A ball. Everyone was invited, including Mr. Bingley and his friends. Mrs. Bennet made sure her daughters looked their best. She hoped that Mr. Bingley would notice one of them, especially Jane, who was so beautiful and sweet. At the ball, Mr. Bingley arrived with his sisters and a group of friends. One of these friends was Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, a tall, handsome, and very rich man. Everyone was impressed by him because of his wealth and appearance. However, it did not take long for people to realize that Mr. Darcy was proud and distant. He did not talk much or dance with anyone outside his group. Mr. Bingley, on the other hand, was completely different. He was cheerful, friendly, and polite. He danced with many ladies at the ball, but he seemed especially interested in Jane Bennet. They spent a lot of time together, laughing and talking. Everyone noticed how well they got along, including Mrs. Bennet, who was delighted. Elizabeth watched her sister Jane and Mr. Bingley with a smile. She was happy for Jane because she knew how kind and good-hearted her sister was. But Elizabeth also paid attention to Mr. Darcy. Unlike most people, she did not find him impressive. In fact, she disliked him from the start. Here's why. During the ball, someone overheard Mr. Darcy saying, that Elizabeth was tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. These words spread quickly, and Elizabeth heard about them. She felt insulted and hurt. How dare Mr. Darcy judge her like that? From that moment, Elizabeth decided that Mr. Darcy was rude, arrogant, and not worth her time. While Elizabeth formed a bad opinion of Mr. Darcy, Jane continued to enjoy Mr. Bingley's company. They clearly liked each other, and it seemed like the beginning of something special. Mrs. Bennet was overjoyed. She started imagining Jane marrying Mr. Bingley and living in Netherfield Park. But Elizabeth could not forget what Mr. Darcy had said about her. She shared her feelings with her best friend, Charlotte Lucas, who advised her not to take it too seriously. "Men like Mr. Darcy are often misunderstood," Charlotte said. "Maybe he didn't mean to offend you." But Elizabeth refused to change her mind. To her, Mr. Darcy represented everything she disliked: pride, arrogance, and selfishness. As the days passed, Mr. Bingley continued to visit the Bennet family, spending more time with Jane. His sisters, however, were less friendly. They acted superior and looked down on the Bennets because they were not as wealthy or refined. Elizabeth noticed this and disliked them even more than she disliked Mr. Darcy. Meanwhile, Mr. Darcy began to notice Elizabeth too. He saw how clever and lively she was, even though he still thought her family was beneath him. Elizabeth, however, remained unaware of his growing interest. She was too focused on protecting herself from his rudeness. Little did Elizabeth know, her opinions about Mr. Darcy would soon be tested. New characters would enter the story, bringing secrets, lies, and surprises that would challenge everything she believed. Would Elizabeth's pride keep her from seeing the truth? And would Mr. Darcy overcome his prejudice to win her heart? Misunderstandings and growing tensions. As the days went by, Mr. Bingley continued to visit the Bennet family. He spent more and more time with Jane, and it was clear that they liked each other very much. They often took walks together, talked for hours, and shared warm smiles. Mrs. Bennet was over the moon. She started planning Jane's wedding in her mind, imagining how wonderful life would be if her daughter married such a rich and kind man. Elizabeth, however, noticed something strange. Mr. Bingley's sisters, especially the eldest, Caroline, Bingley, were not as friendly as they seemed. They acted polite on the surface, but often made rude comments about the Bennet family behind their backs. Caroline, in particular, looked down on the Bennets because they were not as wealthy or refined as her own family. Elizabeth saw through their behavior and disliked them intensely. Meanwhile, Mr. Darcy began to pay more attention to Elizabeth. At first, he had thought her family was beneath him, but he couldn't ignore how clever, lively, and confident she was. Elizabeth, however, remained unaware of his growing interest. She still believed that Darcy was proud, arrogant, and unkind. One day, a new face appeared in the village, a charming soldier named George Wickham. He quickly became popular, especially among the ladies. Wickham was handsome, friendly, and always ready with an interesting story. When Elizabeth met him, she found him delightful. They talked often, and Wickham told her many things about his past, including a shocking story about Mr. Darcy. Wickham claimed that Darcy had treated him badly years ago. According to Wickham, Darcy's father had promised him a valuable position in the church, But after his father's death, Darcy refused to honor the promise out of jealousy and pride. Wickham said this left him poor and struggling. Elizabeth believed Wickham's story without question. It fit perfectly with her opinion of Darcy as a selfish and cruel man. Her dislike for Darcy grew even stronger. She began to see him as someone who used his wealth and power to hurt others. At the same time, Mr. Bingley suddenly decided to leave Netherfield Park and return to London. No one knew why, but Elizabeth suspected that Darcy had something to do with it. She believed that Darcy had convinced Bingley to abandon Jane, thinking her family was not good enough for him. This made Elizabeth even angrier with Darcy. Jane was heartbroken when Bingley left. She tried to hide her sadness, but Elizabeth could see how much she missed him. Mrs. Bennet was furious. She blamed Darcy and his friends for ruining what she thought was a perfect match. Elizabeth shared her feelings with her best friend, Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte listened patiently, but advised Elizabeth to be careful. "You're quick to judge people," she said gently. "Maybe there's more to Mr. Darcy than you think." But Elizabeth refused to listen. To her, Darcy was the villain of the story, and nothing could change her mind. Around this time, another event shook the Bennet household. A pompous clergyman named Mr. William Collins arrived for a visit. He was a cousin of the Bennet family, and stood to inherit their home because Mr. Bennet had no sons. Mr. Collins was loud, silly, and full of himself. He constantly praised his patron, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and bragged about his own importance. During his stay, Mr. Collins decided to propose marriage to Elizabeth. He gave a long, ridiculous speech about how marrying her would be an honor for both of them. Elizabeth, horrified, rejected him immediately. Mrs. Bennet was furious. She begged Elizabeth to change her mind, but Elizabeth refused. "I will never marry someone I don't respect," she declared firmly. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Collins quickly turned his attention to Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's best friend. Charlotte accepted his proposal, explaining to Elizabeth that she wanted security more than love. Elizabeth was shocked, but respected Charlotte's decision. As all these events unfolded, tensions in the Bennet household grew. Lydia and Kitty were obsessed with the soldiers stationed nearby, especially George Wickham. Mrs. Bennet complained endlessly about Mr. Bingley's absence, and Elizabeth found herself caught between anger toward Darcy and worry about Jane's broken heart. Little did Elizabeth know, the biggest surprises were yet to come. Secrets about Wickham, Darcy, and even her own family would soon come to light, testing her beliefs and forcing her to rethink everything she thought she knew. Darcy's proposal and Elizabeth's rejection. As time passed, Elizabeth continued to believe that Mr. Darcy was a bad man. She thought he was proud, selfish, and unkind. But soon, an unexpected event changed everything. One day, Elizabeth received an invitation to visit her friend Charlotte, who was now married to Mr. Collins. Charlotte lived in a place called Hunsford Parsonage, near a grand estate called Rosings Park. The owner of Rosings Park was Lady Catherine de Bourgh, a rich and powerful woman, and also Mr. Darcy's aunt. Elizabeth agreed to visit Charlotte. During her stay, she often saw Mr. Darcy, who was visiting his aunt at Rosings Park. To Elizabeth's surprise, Darcy seemed different. He paid attention to her, talked to her more, and even looked at her with kindness. But Elizabeth still distrusted. Him because of what George Wickham had told her. Then, one evening, something shocking happened. Mr. Darcy came to see Elizabeth when she was alone. He looked nervous but determined. After a long pause, he said, "Miss Elizabeth, I love you. Against my better judgment, against all reason, I have fallen in love with you. Will you marry me?" Elizabeth was stunned. She had never expected this. But as she listened to Darcy speak, her shock turned into anger. Darcy explained that he loved her despite her family's lower social status. He even criticized her family. For being improper and embarrassing, Elizabeth felt insulted. How dare he speak about her family like that? And how could he expect her to accept him after all the harm he had caused? Without hesitation, she refused his proposal. "No, Mr. Darcy," she said firmly. "I could never marry a man who has ruined my sister's happiness, treated others unfairly, and acted so arrogantly." Darcy was shocked. He had expected Elizabeth to say yes, but instead she accused him of ruining Jane's relationship with Mr. Bingley and mistreating George Wickham. Elizabeth spoke passionately, telling Darcy exactly what she thought of him. After Elizabeth rejected him, Darcy left quickly, looking upset. The next morning, Elizabeth found a letter waiting for her. It was from Darcy. In the letter, he explained his side of the story. First, he admitted that he had advised Mr. Bingley not to pursue Jane, but only because he believed Jane did not truly love Bingley. He thought Jane was too calm and polite to show her feelings clearly. Second, he revealed the truth about George Wickham. According to Darcy, Wickham had squandered the money meant for him and then tried to elope with Darcy's younger sister, Georgiana, just to get her fortune. When his plan failed, Wickham disappeared, leaving shame and trouble behind. Elizabeth read the letter carefully. At first, she didn't want to believe it, but as she thought about Darcy's words, she began to realize that maybe she had been wrong about him. Wickham's charm suddenly seemed fake, and Darcy's actions made more sense. Over the next few days, Elizabeth kept thinking about the letter. She realized that she had judged Darcy too quickly, based on lies and misunderstandings. She also saw her own mistakes, how her pride in her ability to judge people had blinded her to the truth. Meanwhile, Darcy was struggling too. He regretted the way he had proposed to Elizabeth. He knew he had come across as arrogant and insulting. He decided to change his behavior and prove that he was not the man Elizabeth thought he was. Little did Elizabeth know, this was just the beginning of a journey of self-discovery for both her and Darcy. As they grew closer to understanding each other, new challenges would test their feelings, or a trip to Pemberley and new perspectives. After her time at Hunsford Parsonage, Elizabeth returned home to the Bennet family, but her thoughts were still full of Mr. Darcy and his letter. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had written, how he explained his actions and revealed the truth about George Wickham. Slowly, Elizabeth began to see Darcy differently. She realized that she had judged him too harshly and that maybe he wasn't as bad as she had thought. Not long after, Elizabeth went on a trip with her aunt and uncle, the Gardiners. They planned to visit beautiful places in northern England, including lakes, mountains, and historic homes. During their travels, they decided to visit a grand estate called Pemberley, which belonged to none other than Mr. Darcy. At first, Elizabeth hesitated. "What if Mr. Darcy is there?" she wondered. But her aunt and uncle reassured her, saying they had heard he was away on business. So they went ahead with their plans. When Elizabeth arrived at Pemberley, she was amazed by its beauty. The house was enormous, with elegant rooms, beautiful gardens, and breathtaking views. But what surprised Elizabeth most was how kind the servants were when they spoke about Darcy. "He's a wonderful master," one servant said. "Always fair, always generous." Elizabeth also learned from the housekeeper that Darcy was deeply loved by everyone who worked for him. "He's like a father to his sister Georgiana," the housekeeper added. "And he helps the poor people in the village without expecting anything in return." These stories made Elizabeth rethink her opinion of Darcy once again. She began to see him not as a proud and selfish man, but as someone who cared deeply for others, even if he didn't always show it. Then, something unexpected happened. While Elizabeth was exploring the gardens of Pemberley, she suddenly came face to face with Mr. Darcy himself. He had returned home earlier than expected. For a moment, both of them stood frozen, unsure of what to say. But then, Darcy surprised Elizabeth. Instead of acting cold or arrogant, he greeted her warmly and politely. He asked about her family, and even invited her uncle and aunt to fish on his property. Over the next few days, Darcy continued to be kind and respectful, not just to Elizabeth, but to her aunt and uncle as well. He introduced Elizabeth to his younger sister, Georgiana, who was shy but very sweet. Elizabeth saw a side of Darcy she had never seen before, humble, caring, and thoughtful. But just as Elizabeth started to feel closer to Darcy, disaster struck, back home. News arrived that Elizabeth's youngest sister, Lydia, had run away with George Wickham. The situation was serious. In those days, running away with a man without getting married was considered scandalous. If Lydia and Wickham did not marry quickly, the entire Bennet family would be ruined. Their reputation would be destroyed, and no one would want to associate with them. Elizabeth was devastated. She knew that George Wickham was not a good man. He only wanted money and pleasure. What if he abandoned Lydia? What if she ended up alone and disgraced? Darcy, hearing the news, immediately sprang into action. Though Elizabeth didn't know it at the time, Darcy secretly traveled to London to find Lydia and Wickham. Using his wealth and influence, he persuaded Wickham to marry Lydia, paying off his debts and ensuring the marriage would happen. Thanks to Darcy's efforts, Lydia and Wickham returned home as a married couple. The Bennet family was saved from disgrace. But Elizabeth had no idea that Darcy was the one who had helped them. She only learned the truth later, when her aunt and uncle told her everything. When Elizabeth found out what Darcy had done, she was overwhelmed with gratitude. She realized how much Darcy cared for her and her family, even though they had treated him poorly in the past. This act of kindness changed her feelings toward him completely. Meanwhile, Mr. Bingley returned to Netherfield Park and rekindled his romance with Jane. It was clear that their love had never faded, and soon Bingley proposed to Jane. She happily accepted, and the whole family celebrated the joyful news. As Elizabeth reflected on all that had happened, she realized how much she had grown. She had learned to look beyond first impressions, forgive others, and see the good in people, even those she had once disliked. And now she felt something new growing in her heart. Love for Mr. Darcy. 5. Happy endings and lessons learned. As the story nears its end, Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy are closer than ever, but they still have one final hurdle to overcome. Both of them have changed so much since their first meeting. Elizabeth has learned to let go of her quick judgments, while Darcy has worked hard to become more humble and kind. Now, it's time for them to face their feelings and see if love can truly conquer all. One day, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, Darcy's wealthy and overbearing aunt, arrived unexpectedly at the Bennet home. She had heard rumors that Elizabeth might marry Darcy, and she was furious. Lady Catherine demanded that Elizabeth promise never to accept a proposal from Darcy. "You are not good enough for him," Lady Catherine declared. "You must refuse him if he asks." But Elizabeth stood her ground. "I will not make any promises," she said firmly. "If Mr. Darcy chooses to propose to me, it is his decision, not mine to reject without reason." Lady Catherine left in a rage, but Elizabeth felt proud of herself. She had spoken her mind and refused to be intimidated. Meanwhile, Darcy was inspired by Elizabeth's courage and honesty. He realized that he loved her more than ever, and decided to propose again, this time with humility and sincerity. When he met Elizabeth during a walk, he poured out his heart. "Elizabeth," he said softly, "I know I was wrong before. I was proud and selfish, but I have tried to change. You have taught me what it means to be better. If you can forgive me, I would be honored to spend my life with you." Elizabeth smiled, tears in her eyes. "I have been wrong, too," she admitted. "I judged you unfairly, but now I see the man you truly are. Yes, Mr. Darcy, I will marry you." Their engagement brought joy to everyone who cared about them. Even Mr. Bennet, though he teased Elizabeth about marrying such a serious man, gave his blessing. Mrs. Bennet was thrilled beyond words, already planning the grand wedding. At the same time, Jane and Mr. Bingley were happily preparing for their own marriage. Their love had grown stronger through every challenge, and they looked forward to building a happy life together. As for Lydia and Wickham, they settled into a quiet life far from the Bennets. Though their marriage wasn't perfect, Darcy continued to help them financially, ensuring they stayed out of trouble. In the end, Elizabeth and Darcy moved to Pemberley, where they began their new life as husband and wife. Elizabeth brought warmth and liveliness to the grand estate, while Darcy cherished her intelligence and independence. Together they created a home filled with love, respect, and laughter. The story closes with a reflection on how much everyone has grown. Elizabeth and Darcy learned to see past their pride and prejudice, finding true happiness in understanding and forgiveness. Jane and Bingley proved that kindness and patience could overcome doubt. And even characters like Mr. Collins and Lady Catherine reminded readers that not everyone changes, but we can still choose to rise above negativity. Through Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen teaches us timeless lessons. First impressions aren't always right. Love requires effort, understanding, and compromise. True happiness comes when we value character over wealth or status. And so, the tale of Elizabeth and Darcy ends not just as a romance, but as a celebration of growth, love, and second chances. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Pride and Prejudice. We hope you enjoyed watching Elizabeth and Darcy find their way to each other and learn something along the way.